Okay, guys, good morning and welcome back to our Cooper Reading Between the Lines book club. So we are on part 6 of Cooper, and we've been talking about antecedent variables. So we started talking about motivating operations as well as SDs, because when you think about the 4-term contingency, you have your MO, your SD, your behavior, and your consequence. MO and SD are always going to be antecedents. And those are the things that we can change. So right now we're talking about unconditioned motivating operations. So remember, unconditioned is anything that is unlearned. So these are things that just come naturally to us as humans. So in this example, they have food deprivation, painful stimulation. Those are unconditioned motivating operations. The terms unconditioned and conditioned modify the MOs in the same way they modify respondent eliciting stimuli and operant reinforcers and punishers. The effects of unconditioned motivating operations, like unconditioned eliciting stimuli for respondent behavior and unconditioned reinforcers and punishers, are not dependent on the organism's learning history. So that's what we talked about as unconditioned being unlearned. So anytime you see unlearned or unconditioned, think about it being unlearned. Okay, so MOs are classified as unconditioned based upon the unlearned aspect of their value altering effects. Since the behavior altering effects of MOs are usually learned, said another way, we are born with the capacity to be affected by food reinforcement as a result of food deprivation. But we could learn the behaviors evoked by food deprivation, asking for food, going for where food is kept, cooking, and so forth. Deprivation of food, water, oxygen, activity, and sleep all have reinforcer establishing and evocative effects. So anytime you are manipulating or depriving the person of those unconditioned, innately desirable items, then you are making food, sleep, water, and all of those other things more reinforcing. So your evocative effect or your behavior altering effect is going to be the actual behavior that is involved with them trying to find food or them going to the water fountain to drink some water. So all of those behaviors were evoked by the deprivation of those innately desirable activities or items. Does anybody have any questions on those before we go into some examples?
No, I'm fine.
I think I'm good.
Okay. So here they're giving us all of those innately desirable MOs. So you have food, water, sleep, activity, oxygen, sex, becoming too warm, becoming too cold, increase in painful stimulus. So whenever you guys are taking the exam or just having to answer any mock question that's regarding unconditioned motivating operations, look at the MO. So what is happening here? So in this example, food deprivation has a reinforcer establishing effect. It's going to increase the effectiveness of food as a reinforcer. And it has an evocative effect. It's going to increase the current frequency of all behavior previously reinforced with food. And we can do that for all of them. So if we deprive them of water, the UMO is now I'm thirsty. So it's going to increase the effectiveness of water as a reinforcer. And it's going to have an evocative effect, which increases the current frequency of all behavior previously reinforced with water. So as a BCBA, as a behavior analyst, this is something that you're always going to look at. You're going to see how can I make this more reinforcing, or for a client who they say, oh, he has no reinforcers. That's always my favorite thing. They're like, he's not motivated by anything. Everybody is motivated by something. They just have to want it bad enough. And the way that we would determine whether they want it bad enough is if they have been exposed to it enough, or if they have been deprived of it. So always put on your ABA hat on and go back to your basics. It's like some people forget about the basics. And this is like the most important thing. It's like we can manipulate the MO in order to increase the effectiveness of a reinforcer. So just always remember that. These are more naturally occurring reinforcers. So you might go into those like ethical dilemmas where it's like, well, I can't deprive him of food. So these might be things that you might use more so like on yourself as reinforcers. But it's always something to consider. But remember, unconditioned, always you go into that like ethical boundary that you want to be sure that you're not crossing. Okay, let's see. Somebody's saying something in the chat. Are we on? Yes.
Sally,
Yes.
is it possible, or have you ever seen using one reinforcer to reinforce another thing, which is also a reinforcer?
Oh, yes, that's called stimulus pairing, right? So you're trying to pair a previously reinforcing reinforcer in order to make the other one reinforcing. Is that what you're saying?
I don't know, but do you remember the boy I told you the other time who doesn't respond to anything? Yesterday, today I got him. He's thirsty. He wanted the water, but he would not say. So I used biscuit as his reinforcer that I've established 2 days ago to reinforce him to say water, to get the water. Even though he's so thirsty and he wanted the water, he wouldn't say water.
So is the reinforcer being used as a reinforce? I mean, is the biscuit being used as a reinforcer, or is
so the biscuit is used as a reinforcer?
Or is it being used to make him thirsty?
He's thirsty already. Anyway, he's thirsty and he's supposed to say water. If I wouldn't say, but if I show him the biscuit, then he will say water and get the water.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like you're doing stimulus pairing.
Okay.
So you're showing his reinforcer to try to increase the reinforcing effects of him saying water. So it's kind of in a way, yeah. So that's always something that you can do too when they say like, oh, he has no motivation but for anything. Find the one thing that he is motivated by, and then you can use again, going back to basics, going back to the very beginning of ABA, which is stimulus pairing. And so what you do is you present their reinforcer at the same time as whatever it is you're trying to get them to do. So I think I've told you guys this like a million times, but what my applied project in college was on stimulus pairing to increase vocalization. And so what we did is that we would say, let's say bubbles, right? So you're playing with the bubbles, and then you would be like, you would present them at the same time. So I'm saying ba, 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 and also giving him bubbles at the same time. So I'm pairing sound with his reinforcer so that eventually, hopefully, the sound, the making that ba, ba, ba sound becomes reinforcing. And then it's really cool because you'll see them on their own playing, and they'll be saying it randomly. So it's really cool. Yeah.
So thank you for that advice. It really worked.
Good, good.
You know, my boy talking.
Good. That makes me happy. Yeah, it's all about manipulating the MOs and trying to figure out what you can use to increase motivation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Speak today.
Good. That makes me so happy.
Yeah.
Okay, so then MOs for punishment, using motivation for punishment. So MOs may also alter, increase, or decrease the punishing effectiveness of a stimulus, as well as the frequency. So evoke or abate of behaviors that have been punished by a stimulus. Thus, an EO related to punishment would have a punisher establishing effect, an abative effect. For example, a migraine would establish the effectiveness of bright light as a punisher and decrease the frequency of behaviors that in the past have been produced by bright light. So opening the curtains, turning the light on. Some biological states, such as pregnancy, may establish certain tastes or smells as punishers and decrease the occurrence of behaviors that have been produced by them. Oh my gosh, that's what we were just talking about, right? Meat, right? I don't care about meat. Like, I love meat. I love chicken wings, and I love steak and all of that. But now, because I'm in this current biological state, chicken has become a punisher. Like, the smell of it makes me barf. And so now it's decreased all of my wanting chicken wing behaviors, which is something like that I really love. Like, I love going to eat wings. So sometimes it's like I'm being put on extinction, right? So I'm like, I'm having to throw up and all this stuff. And so I'm like, okay, I won't do that for a while. But then I'm like, oh, but I really love chicken wings. So I'm just gonna try it one more time. And I go and I try it, and it's still gross. But it's that same manipulating the MO. So we manipulated. Now this lady is in this current state of pregnancy. So now chicken has become a punisher for her, no longer reinforced. So she no longer goes to the chicken wing place for the time being.
So is it going to be a temporal punishment for you?
Kind of, yeah, it is. It's kind of become an MO for punishment. Chicken has become an MO for punishment for me. It's so sad.
Yeah.
I've also had that example where it says, like, if you have a migraine, light becomes punishing. So I think I've told you guys this story before, but when I used to work in the clinic, I got a concussion one time because I was being so crazy and like pushing one of the kids on one of these little carts, and then the car stopped, and so I did like a flip over the child, and I landed on my head, and I got a concussion. I had to go to the ER. And when I was in the ER, like, the room, the hospital was so bright. I had to tell the guy when he walked in, the doctor, I was like, can you please turn the light off? And that's like a behavior that I would have not typically engaged in, or that I would have asked him for if I was in a different state. But because I had a concussion, the light was so bright, it was like piercing into my brain, and I already felt like I was like spinning, so the light was just making it worse. So because of the state that I was in, light was punishing for me. But yeah, those are all cool examples of how MOs can also be changed to make things less reinforcing. So no longer reinforcing by chicken, no longer enjoying the bright light, stuff like that. So those things were unconditioned. Those are things that you could not like biologically, like they were not learned. It was just something that happened because of some type of internal biological state. So that's really cool. Just always think about unconditioned as those like internal biological states. Anybody have any questions so far on unconditioned or have like funny examples? Oh, here it's talking about alcohol. Does anybody have a certain alcohol that maybe has become a punisher for you? Like anytime you see tequila, you just want to barf and you stay away from it.
Okay, Selena, now you got me. Yesterday was Cinco de Mayo, right?
Oh, yes. What did you do, Olga?
We went out for tacos and burritos and all of the fun stuff, and of course margaritas, but they didn't have enough tequila in the margaritas. We were all complaining. But that's actually not my story. My story goes back to prom, which was a million years ago, and friends of mine thought it was cool to get Jack Daniels. Well, I got sick from it, and from this point, I mean, from that point on, we're talking many years ago, I refused to even look at like a billboard when you're driving south and you see Jack Daniels signs. I'm like, oh, I just want to. So it's very adversive and not, yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. That's a good example of an MO becoming a punisher. Mine is vodka, because I have like a similar story like that. We went to like a pep rally, and we put vodka in water bottles with like, I don't know, like Kool-Aid or something. So it was like half vodka, half Kool-Aid, and we're like at the school pep rally with, it was just bad experience. So now the smell of vodka or even hand sanitizer sometimes, I'm like,
Why would you do that?
why? Because it made me sick and it made me throw up. And so now I can't have vodka, and the smell of vodka makes me want to throw up.
Oh,
So it became an unconditioned punisher for me.
I get it.
Because I have a bad learned history with it. So those are good. Those are good examples. I think we're getting it. Okay, it says the disapproving look. Oh, for instance, a parent's disapproval may function as a conditioned punisher as a result of being paired with strict access to video games. So now I think it's talking about conditioned, because this is learned. The disapproving look will be most effective as a conditioned punisher when an MO for playing video games is in effect. If the child has already played enough video games for the day, they're satisfied, then the disapproving look will be less effective in reducing behavior. Okay. Timeout is punishment and response cost. Timeout will only be effective in time in when time in serves as a reinforcer while the behavior is being punished. So this is a really important sentence that you guys want to remember. about timeout. I see it a lot on like mocks, or people will ask these type of questions. I think somebody has even asked it in our group. So timeout will only be effective if the time in was reinforcing. So just be very careful when using timeout.
Okay.
Okay, let's see. Now we're on 382. Looking at the multiple effects of MOs. So most environmental events have more than one effect upon behavior. It is important to recognize these various effects and not confuse one effect with another. Skinner, 1953, page 204 to 224. Multiple effects are readily apparent in an animal laboratory, laboratory demonstration of an operant chain. A food-deprived rat pulls a cord hanging from the ceiling of the chamber. Pulling the cord produces an auditory stimulus such as a buzzer. The presence of the buzzer, the rat presses the lever and receives a food pellet. The onset of the buzzer has two obvious effects. Okay, so now they're talking about stimulus-stimulus pairing. It evokes the lever press, and two, it increases the future frequency of cord pulling. The buzzer functions as an SD for the evocative effect and as a conditioned reinforcer for the reinforcement effect. Both effects influence behavior in the same direction, an increase in the current frequency of lever pressing and an increase in the future frequency of pulling the cord. Similarly, a hungry person might open the fridge to find their roommate's leftover Mexican food. The sight of Mexican food evokes behaviors associated with eating it. But in Olga's case, it might evoke the opposite effect of not eating it because she's like, oh, I had too much last night.
Yeah.
Similarly, if pressing the lever in the presence of the buzzer produces an electric shock, then the sound of the buzzer would function as a SDP. Ooh, fancy. I never knew what an SDP was until I took my exam. Did you guys know that? I had to figure out like on my own, like using context clues, because I'm like, I know what an SD is. What's an SDP? And I'm like freaking out. It's basically
Sure.
yeah, it's basically the same thing, but as a punisher. So we're stimulus pairing, but now we're doing the opposite. We're pairing it as a punisher. So now we're giving a shock along with it. And so now it becomes punishing. And so the buzzer would have an abative effect. So now we're no longer evoking a behavior, we're using abolishing operation. So we're reducing the effectiveness of whatever it is he's trying to get to, or whatever the behavior he's trying to do. So decreases the future frequency of pulling the cord. Yes. So these things are very, very basic, but it's really important in the exam, in your mocks and all of that. And even as a BCBA, like you're gonna have to be able to know how to manipulate those MOs and pair them with certain SDs in order to increase behaviors. And so like as a BCBA, you guys might give them like a specific SD in the beginning when they're first trying to learn the skill. So this is something really important that I always tell my technicians. It's like, use the SD that I have written. If I didn't say use whatever SD you want, that means that I want you to teach them using this SD. And once they get it with this one, then we can generalize out to other ones. But for example, like I had a little baby and maybe all she could do was, she was learning give me. She was learning give me as a listener response. And so when I started teaching her to identify items, if one of the technicians would be like, point to frog or touch frog, she doesn't have that in her repertoire yet. So it wouldn't be beneficial for her just yet. So I asked them that when they did run those receptive identification targets, that they used give me, because that's something she already knows. And then once she understands what we're doing, then we can move on. So all of these things about like manipulating the MO and finding the reinforcer and all of that comes into play when you're writing your behavior plans or your skill acquisition plans. So all of this stuff, super basic, but super important. I'm gonna pause the recording. Somehow.